On Christmas Eve, the wind cut across the prairie like a blade, sharp and merciless, carrying with it the sound of distant cattle lowing and the lonely creak of wooden boards straining against the cold, and inside the small, drafty kitchen of the McAllister Ranch house, Clara Whitmore sat perfectly still at the narrow table, her hands folded in her lap, her stomach aching with a hollow pain she had learned to ignore. The oil lamp on the wall flickered weakly, casting trembling shadows that made the room feel even emptier than it already was. There was no supper on the table. No bread, no stew, not even a scrap of leftover meat. Only a chipped plate turned upside down, as if pretending food had once been there. Clara had arrived in this harsh land 3 weeks earlier, a mail-order bride with a single worn suitcase and a heart full of quiet hope, believing the promises written in careful ink by a man she barely knew. Those letters had spoken of a modest ranch, honest work, and a shared life built on mutual respect. They had not spoken of silence, cold indifference, or nights like this, where hunger pressed so fiercely against her ribs that she wondered if her body might simply fold inward from the emptiness. Outside, snow dusted the ground like a cruel mockery of celebration, and somewhere far away, church bells rang, reminding her that tonight was Christmas Eve, a night meant for warmth, food, and family, things she had none of. Her husband, Edgar Whitmore, had left hours earlier without a word, his boots heavy against the floorboards, his coat pulled tight, his face set in that distant, closed expression she had come to recognize all too well. Edgar was not cruel in the loud, violent way some men were, but his neglect cut deeper than shouting ever could. He spoke little, ate first when there was food, and never asked if she was warm or hungry. Clara had learned quickly that her presence was more obligation than desire, a solution to loneliness Edgar would never admit to feeling. Tonight, he had taken the last of the beans and bacon with him to the barn, claiming he had work to do and no time for sentiment. Clara did not argue. She never did. She simply nodded, as she always did, and watched him go, the door slamming shut behind him like a final judgment. Now she sat alone, listening to the wind and the distant jingle of a cowbell, her thoughts drifting back to the life she had left behind. Back east, Christmas Eve meant her mother humming softly while kneading dough, the smell of fresh bread filling the house, her father reading aloud by the fire, and laughter, so much laughter it had seemed endless at the time. That life had slipped through her fingers the day her parents passed within months of each other, leaving her with nothing but debts and the quiet desperation that had led her to answer Edgar's advertisement. Widower seeks wife, it had said. Honest living. Room and board provided. It had seemed like salvation. Now, as her stomach twisted painfully, Clara wondered if she had simply traded one kind of poverty for another. She rose slowly from the table, wrapping her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, and moved to the small window. Frost etched delicate patterns across the glass, beautiful and cruel all at once. She traced one with her finger, her breath fogging the pain, and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure anyone was listening to. She did not ask for much. Just enough strength to endure. Just enough hope to make it through another day. As if in response, the wind howled louder, and for a moment, she felt utterly invisible in the vastness of the prairie. Then, faintly, she heard it, a sound that did not belong to the ranch. Hoofbeats. Slow and steady, crunching against the frozen ground. Clara's heart skipped, a flicker of unease stirring in her chest. Visitors were rare, especially at night, and never on Christmas Eve. She hesitated, then peered through the window again, wiping away the frost with her sleeve. A single rider approached, his silhouette dark against the pale snow, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a heavy coat draped over broad shoulders. He rode with an easy confidence, as if the land itself recognized him and parted willingly beneath his horse's hooves. The rider dismounted near the fence, tying his horse with practiced hands before approaching the house. Clara's pulse quickened. She had no reason to fear him, yet something about his presence stirred a strange mix of caution and curiosity. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch, debating whether to open it at all. Before she could decide, there was a knock, firm but not aggressive, a sound that carried respect rather than demand. When she opened the door, cold air rushed in, biting at her face, but the man standing there seemed to bring a different kind of warmth with him. He was tall, his face weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of dark honey and a beard dusted with frost. He removed his hat immediately, holding it against his chest in a gesture so courteous it nearly brought tears to Clara's eyes. "Evenin', ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady, like a calm river. Sorry to bother you so late. Name's Jack Calder. I was ridin' back from the North Range and noticed your barn light on earlier. Thought I'd check in. Weather's tenant mean. Clara swallowed, suddenly aware of how thin her dress was, how hollow her cheeks must look. Good evening, she replied softly. My husband's not here at the moment. Jack nodded, his gaze flicking briefly to the empty kitchen behind her, then back to her face, his expression unreadable but not unkind. I won't take much of your time. Just wanted to make sure everything was all right. Roads are near impassable. It's fine, Clara said, though the word felt like a lie in her mouth. Jack seemed to sense it. He shifted his weight, then cleared his throat. Beggin' your pardon, ma'am, but it's Christmas Eve. Didn't sit right with me passin' by without at least sayin' hello. Something inside Clara cracked at that. The simple acknowledgement of the day, the kindness in his voice, it was more than she had received since arriving. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and stepped aside. Would you like to come in? She asked quietly. Jack hesitated, then nodded. If it's no trouble. He entered, stamping the snow from his boots, and the room felt smaller with him in it, but also safer, as though the cold had less power now. His eyes moved over the bare table, the empty stove, and something dark flickered across his face, anger, maybe, or concern. He said nothing, but Clara felt suddenly exposed, as if her hunger were written plainly on her skin. Jack reached into his saddlebag, which he had carried inside with him, and pulled out a small tin. I've got some stew left from supper, he said, holding it out. Ain't fancy, but it's hot. Thought you might like some. Clara stared at the tin, her throat tightening. Pride flared, then faltered under the weight of her need. I couldn't, she whispered. That's yours. Jack smiled gently. Ma'am, I've already eaten my fill. And no one should go hungry on Christmas Eve. He set the tin on the table, lit the stove with practiced ease, and warmed the stew as if it were the most natural thing in the world. When he ladled it onto a plate and slid it toward her, the smell alone made her knees weak. Tears blurred her vision as she took the first bite, the warmth spreading through her like a miracle. Jack watched quietly, then took a spoonful himself, sitting across from her, sharing the plate without a second thought. In that small, dim kitchen, on a night meant for miracles, something shifted, something fragile but powerful, like the first spark of a fire in the cold. And if this story has already touched your heart, remember to subscribe to the channel, because what happens next between a starving bride and a kind-hearted cowboy will change both their lives forever.